What's the biggest bullet you've ever dodged? I had 2 job offers in different states at the same time. The one I didn't take was offering more money, but I just didn't gel with the guy who would be my boss, and really liked the guy who would be my boss at the lower offer. The better offer was in a state I had always wanted to live in, for a company I admired, but something felt off, so I went with the lower offer. I ended up meeting my wife in the city with the lower offer. Meanwhile, the company that had given me the higher offer abruptly closed and laid off their entire staff with no severance. So if I had taken that, I would have been stuck on the other side of the country with no job and no money. And no wife, apparently. I mean, it is kind of crazy how, like, one little decision you make can just drastically change what the outcome of your life is going to be. A literal one. A friend was showing off some handguns he bought with his first paycheck. Checked the chamber to make sure nothing was in there, sighted at me and pulled the trigger. Of course the gun was loaded. Bullet passed right over my shoulder and buried itself in a chair. We aren't friends anymore for some odd reason. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that there are some people that should probably not have a gun. Once at a bar, a woman was surprisingly into me as we danced. If I had more confidence back then, I definitely would have taken her home. In the end, one of my karaoke buddies ended up with her instead, and got caught by her husband that night. Geez, as if finding dates wasn't difficult enough, people have to go and make it even worse by trying to date while they're already with somebody. Like, man, our culture is getting so screwed up. I broke my lease and moved out of a terrible apartment complex I was living in to move back home because I was broke. 2 weeks later, the whole complex burned to the ground from a meth lab in another unit. Well, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that terrible apartments and meth labs sometimes overlap. That time I didn't go along for the ride when a friend of mine was running weed, years ago, back when it was more illegal, and passed up on this trip because I had to go to a job interview to be a zombie for Halloween festivities at an amusement park. I got the job, my friend got arrested, and did 30 days in jail. This sounds like the kind of story that they would reenact and put on a VHS tape and then show to little kids as they're growing up to steer them away from doing bad stuff and giving into peer pressure. 2005. My friend and I evacuated New Orleans 2 days before Hurricane Katrina and drove to Mississippi with the little money we had. We were trying to decide on where to stay for the night, and it was between a mid-range hotel or the really cheap motel. Decided to spend a little more for the hotel. During the night, the eye of the storm came through Mississippi and flattened the roof on the motel we decided against. Man, sounds like you dodged a few bullets trying to get away from that. You know, living in, like, one of the driest states way up in the mountains, we don't get a lot of hurricanes up here in Utah. So sometimes when people are like, oh man, it's a really horrible rainstorm with lots of wind, like, the worst that my brain can imagine is not that bad from what I've seen here. In 1996, my parents were deciding between 2 houses to move into. They picked the new construction that resulted in being placed on shoddy soil and years of lawsuits when we ultimately moved in 2001. Anyway, the other house they could have picked, presumably on better soil, would have placed my older city at Columbine High School as a freshman for the 1998 to 1999 school year. Now I wonder what could have gone on there. I got on an inner-city bus and almost sat in the middle, but moved and sat in the back. The bus later collided with a truck and got opened up like a tin can. If I had sat where I originally intended, I would have been killed. Man, it's pretty wild just reading all these stories back to back. It just feels like you're following the wild story of somebody's very lucky day. High school girlfriend wanted to talk to me about baby names. I was headed to college, no thoughts of being a parent. My mom even found a note in my pocket listing her favorites if we had a boy. Anyway, we broke up after 2 years. The next guy she dated was a dad within 9.5 months. Yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong about having kids, but at least wait a while after high school. My ex-girlfriend moved out of my house a day before the first lockdown in Spain. She previously pulled a knife on me. I wonder if there's going to be a lot of horror movies made from the whole pandemic era. All of these stories of being trapped in a house with someone you really don't want to be around. I was booked on Pan Am Flight 103, which went down over Lockerbie, Scotland. I didn't have a premonition or anything supernatural. I just decided to cancel my seat. Didn't think anything of it until the plane went down and my mother had written down my flight plan and reminded me. This was back in the day when you could cancel without a penalty up to a couple days in advance. So I mean, we always hear crazy stories like this and we always bring up like Final Destination. But I mean, when you think about it, so I mean, flights that crash are extremely rare at any case. But pretty much every flight, whether they crash or not, they're going to have people that cancel or they miss the flight or for whatever reason they don't make it to the flight. So in any instance of a plane that crashes, it's going to have probably the same instance of a few people that cancel right before it. So pretty much any instance of a plane crash is going to have stories like this. Not me, a Dutch mate of mine living in Tasmania had to visit his sick mom in Amsterdam. Booking his flight online, he said to his wife, "You know, I'm sick of flying Malaysian Airlines. The food is crap, the hosties are miserable, it'll cost more, but I'm booking with Singapore. So instead of dying on plane MH17, he was on a plane 40 kilometers ahead of it. Wow, 2 of these stories right in a row. You know, I remember hearing a story from the music producer Deadmau5, who was telling a story once about how he had 2 connecting flights, and so he lands in the station and has to just sprint from one side of the airport to the other for a layover, and they just barely don't make it to the flight in time, and then that flight that they just missed goes and crashes. But I mean, I think that we talk about flights as if they're way scarier than they are. I know a lot of people are afraid of flying because of stories like this, but as the cliche goes, you're more likely to die in a car crash. I almost fell for a pyramid scheme in high school. My friend brought me up to one of their meetings, and I was so on board. But my parents talked me down. I was upset at them until I learned more about MLMs and quickly changed my mind. Sometimes I imagine where I'd be now if I went through with it. It wouldn't be pretty, that's for sure. Yet, to be honest, ever since I've been out of high school, there have been quite a few times where I've seen some kind of wild opportunity that I'd have to invest a lot of money into. And looking back at a bunch of those, I'm like, I'm really glad I didn't take, any of those. Because I'd probably have no money and be in a lot of debt right now. I was out kayaking on a lake, and several bullets whizzed by me. There was a distinct buzz, crack, buzz sound as it went by. I think some people were just out plinking in their backyard, adjacent to the lake, and didn't think a backstop was necessary. This also happened to me a few weeks later when I was paddling on a small stream. Bullets whizzed by above the bank, just over my head. I don't think anyone knew I was there either time. Regardless, when you go out and shoot stuff, make sure there's a backstop. Also, I don't know how big the bullets were, so I'm unsure which was the biggest bullet dodged. Man, I wasn't expecting so many people to take the prompt literally. I had a friend who asked if I wanted to move to California with him and his family. I was 16 and thought it sounded fun. I didn't know at the time, but he was actually rescuing me from my insane mother, and a not-so-happy home life. When you were abused, sometimes it's hard to know that you were abused until you become an adult and gain a perspective. I shudder to think what would have happened to me if I had stayed there. After reading all of the other stories so far, this one kind of went backwards from what I was expecting. I was at the Tacoma Mall when the Tacoma Mall shooting happened, walking right towards where the gunman opened fire when my then-fiancé decided to go back into a store we were just in. The time it took us to get back to the store was the same amount of time it would have taken to be right where it all broke out. 10 seconds one direction or 10 seconds in the other. Hearing the screams and gunshots echoing in the mall was crazy. They locked us in the Suncoast video store for a while before having us exit out the back. See, what's so weird about a lot of these stories is usually there's an obvious moral to the story. You know, it's oh, I was in a car crash, but I was wearing a seatbelt, so I survived. So the moral of that is always wear your seatbelt. But with so many of these, it's just I was standing right here, but then I moved 2 steps over, and that's the reason I survived. There's nothing obvious about being in a different position will save your life. So it's kind of hard when you're trying to get a moral out of some of these stories, but there just really isn't one. I was supposed to hang out with a couple of friends one night. We were going to go to a party that we were all invited to the weekend before. I asked to get off work early so I could go to the party. My manager let me go early, so I went to go find my friends. But I had a really bad feeling all day, and it just kept getting worse. Instead of turning left to go to my friend's house, I went right and went home. I found out a few weeks later that they got busted with cocaine in their car. They were 16 and 17 at the time. I was 18, so I would have been screwed. See, I guess you could say that the moral to some of these is just trust your gut. Just trust that weird voice in the back of your head that's telling you not to do something you were already planning on doing. Or just don't do drugs, because drugs are bad, okay? A year ago, I was offered a new job. It was exactly what I was looking for and was really excited. They told me they would email the contract, but after a week I hadn't had anything. After a lot of chasing, they told me they'd change the structure of the organization, so the position wasn't available. I have a month's notice for my current job, and if I had taken the job, my notice period would have been after the cutoff date for furlough in the UK. The new job was in an industry that collapsed through the pandemic, and the industry I worked in has boomed. If I had received that email, I would have probably been close to bankruptcy now. I mean, just as a little side note to this, it doesn't seem kind of weird that it's just so normal to just get ghosted by a company? I swear it happens so often when it comes to interviews. I once met a girl at a bar a few years ago. She was hot and started a conversation with me. I don't remember about what, but at the end of it I wanted to ask her out. But being extremely shy, I couldn't. If she hadn't started talking to me, I would have just admired and avoided her, being a big and awkward guy. Anyway, I went to the bathroom to clear my head, and when I came back I saw my friend who I came with ask her out, which was a total jerk move because I told him I want to ask her out. and I just stand there with an awkward smile waiting for them to leave so I could drink my anger away. A couple of days after that, a mutual friend said that my friend from the bar was robbed by a girl he brought home to his apartment. So still today I get mixed feelings when I see him. I mean, I've never really gone to bars very much, but I've heard a lot of stories that if you are being flirted with by a girl who's way out of your league, she is probably trying to take advantage of you in some way or another. Not me, but my friend. We were in a bar and she was talking to a dude she met on Tinder. When she turned around, I saw him put something into her beer. I walked up, pretended to stumble, and knocked it out of her hand, apologized, told her I'd buy her next beer, and when we walked over to the bar, I told her what he did. We left right after, decided to grab a case of beer and play Mario Kart that night instead. I only tagged along because she asked me to, which I'm always perfectly happy to do. Glad I did. I mean, I kind of want to say something like, why would you bring along a friend when you are meeting up for a date with somebody? But then you've got to throw on, okay, the moral of the story is bring somebody along when you're going to meet up with somebody at a bar. I was driving on a freeway in the right lane when there was a sudden traffic jam ahead. I slammed on my brakes and was about to swerve onto the shoulder when I noticed that I wasn't sure the semi behind me could stop, and I didn't know how long we actually had a shoulder. Construction was happening at the time. I made the decision to rear-end the car in front of me to stay off the shoulder. The truck went into the shoulder, brakes squealing, and finally managed to stop when the back tires of their trailer were level with me. Good thing we weren't in the center lane and that we happened to have a shoulder at that moment. As a bonus, I stopped in time and didn't hit the car in front of me after all, though I would have happily taken that hit, and hopefully only would have shook up the people in front of me, in place of literally being hit by a truck. Yeah, I don't know if it's like a good thing to do, but anytime I have to like really slam on the brakes, especially like on the freeway, I'm always looking at the car behind me just as much as the car in front of me, because I'm like, are they going to be able to stop too? But anyways, that's the end of all of the bullet dodging stories. Yeah, like I said, it's pretty weird to just be listening to one after another, and it just sounds like you're listening to the luckiest person alive. And the moral of the story is, there's not always a moral to every story.